Hey everybody, so it's a video about a bike pump. Let's get that out of the way up front, but I will say that if you've taken the plunge into the world of tubeless tires and you like to experiment with trying different tires, then you know that seating a tubeless bead is probably the trickiest part of the setup process. In this video, I'll give you a quick background on tubeless bike tires and review the Topeak JoeBlow Booster pump that I've been using for all my tubeless tire needs. So for bike tires, there are three basic mounting styles. Clincher tires, which are the most common, hook or clinch onto the inner lip of the rim, but don't create an airtight seal. So clincher tires actually need an inner tube that actually inflates inside of the tire. It is actually the part that holds the air. Tubular tires, on the other hand, are primarily used by elite racers as they're claimed to offer the best feel and the lowest rolling resistance. Now, admittedly, I've never ridden tubular tires myself because I really could never justify the extra work involved in setup and maintenance. Now these are basically giant inflatable donuts with tire tread on the outer side, and they actually need to be glued onto the rim, which is definitely not something the average home mechanic typically wants to deal with. Then, in recent years, the tubeless tire has gotten really popular because they improve the ride feel, small punctures are automatically sealed as you ride, and they effectively eliminate pinch flats, which is where the inner tube is actually cut by the rim itself during excessively hard impacts. Now, since there's no inner tube, with tubeless tires, there's nothing to pinch, which also allows the rider to run much lower pressures, which consequently improves grip and comfort with minimal loss of speed and efficiency. Now a tubeless tire mounts the same way to the rim as a clincher does, but the bead, which is the inner edge of the tire, is far less extensible than on a clincher and forms an airtight seal with the inner rim face. Now since no inner tube is used, all possible places for air to escape from on the rim, spoke holes, and the valve stem area have to be sealed up. Now this is why you use tubeless rim tape and a special tubeless valve when setting up your wheel for tubeless tires. And then as an added insurance policy, you also put a few ounces of a liquid latex-based sealant which floats around freely in the tire and seals up any leaks and small punctures as you ride. So tubeless tire technology definitely has several advantages over clinchers, and they're far easier to set up than tubulars. So it kind of strikes a nice balance between the two. Now, the trickiest part to setting up a tubeless tire is what's called seating the bead, which means essentially forcing the bead of the tire outward and tightly up against the inner rim wall, which creates that airtight seal. And since there's no inner tube physically pushing the tire wall outward against the rim, we need to rely on air pressure to do this part. And so really the only way to properly seat a tubeless tire is to force a large volume of air into the tire in a very short period of time in hopes that the tire will balloon up and seat on the rim. Now if the tire is pretty tight on the rim to begin with, then it is possible to seat a bead using a standard floor pump like this one here that I've had for nearly 20 years, and I've had some success seating tubeless tires with this pump. However, if you can't get air into the tire fast enough, you'll have a really frustrating time trying to seat the tubeless bead. So the obvious solution to this issue, and what every bike shop and even many home mechanics use, is a compressor, which basically gives you an unlimited high volume blast of air that will pretty much seat any tubeless bead. Now I don't have a compressor at home, and for the longest time I didn't get one because I knew them to be super loud, and I still have little kids, one of whom still naps, like right upstairs. So I had basically written off the compressor. That is until a viewer recently pointed out that ultra silent and portable compressors are actually pretty affordable and effective and widely available nowadays. So I may be experimenting with one of those pretty soon. Anyways, if you don't have a compressor and a standard track pump isn't cutting it, then you're still not out of luck because you got this option. Now this is what's called a booster pump, and what distinguishes this from a regular floor pump is this additional pressure vessel on the side. Now this model here is the Topeak JoeBlow Booster pump, and it's one of many variations on this type of pump. Now the way it works is that you turn this little dial to the charge setting, which diverts the air into the pressure vessel. And so you actually pump it up manually to pressures as high as 160 psi. Then when you're ready, you can lock the head onto the valve and release the pressurized air into the tire all at once, hopefully seating the tire bead in the process with a couple of satisfying pops. Which, by the way, is the noise of the bead suddenly stretching over the rim bed and smacking into the inner rim wall. It's a good sound and an indication that you've successfully seated the bead. Then you can continue to pump up the tire as with any other floor pump to your desired pressure. And I should clarify here that if the dial is set to inflate, then yes, the pump does actually act exactly the same way as any other floor pump, bypassing the pressure vessel and allowing air to flow straight into the tire. Now this newer model includes the upgraded DX3 head, which is supposed to be better than the previous version. Now I haven't used the previous version, but I found it really effective on press-to valves, as the fit is tight yet easy to get on and off. However, the pump head does claim to be able to inflate both press-to and Schrader valves without any modification, but in my experience, the fit on the Schrader valve is really tight and a little bit frustrating to get on and off the valve. Now don't get me wrong, it still works for both types of valves, it's just that it works much better for press-to valves. Now the hose is also notably longer than on any other pump that I've ever used, which is actually kind of nice as you don't have to move the base around and it gives you much more freedom to move around the bike. Now the hose is mounted to the body via this little rotating coupler, which is actually pretty nice since it doesn't create any weird bends in the hose as you move around. It also has this nice little anodized pressure relief button here so that you can actually drop air pressure as well as inflate the tires. Now the gauge is located at the top of the canister as opposed to other more budget options which are mounted down at the base. And it may not seem like a big deal to some, but it actually makes reading the gauge a lot easier since it's that much closer to your eyes. Now the accuracy of the gauge is not super high, as is generally the case on most floor pumps, and I always verify my pressures by using a separate digital gauge. Now more often than not, the pump gauge reads to within 5% or so of the digital gauge, but I still take the digital gauge to be the truth model. Now so far this pump has been really solid and it weighs in at 2.8 kilograms, which is a tank compared to the standard floor pump, which comes in at 1.4 kilograms. Now as a home mechanic, still without a compressor, this has actually been a perfect addition to the shop and has allowed me to experiment with many different tire rim combinations on several different bikes, including 700C road wheels, as well as a couple sets of 29er mountain bike wheels. It also works fine to inflate my kids' tires thanks to a pretty low profile pump head, which on some pumps can sometimes get in the way for really small 12 to 16 inch wheels. So are there any downsides to this pump? Well, not too many, except maybe the price. Now this updated version definitely sits at the upper end of the spectrum, and then there are other options as well, like standalone boost canisters that are basically just pressure vessels that you pump up with a normal floor pump and are used the same way as a boost pump to seat tubeless tire beads. Now this is definitely a cheaper option, but those who prefer to have an all-in-one unit, like a true booster pump, may not prefer the canister option. Also, because it is a higher pressure pump, the pump action is actually pretty slow, meaning that the air volume per pump is less than that of a standard floor pump. Now this is actually necessary to be able to fill a tank to 160 psi manually. Otherwise, if the volume per stroke were too high, no one but the strongest of people would actually be able to pressurize the thing. So filling the chamber does actually take a while, close to a minute on average in my experience, to get to 160 psi. But on the other hand, I have been able to successfully seat tubeless beads just by pressurizing to 140 psi, and in some cases as low as 120 psi. So not really a big deal, and it doesn't outweigh the benefits of being able to set up tubeless tires at home. Now the other thing is that it's really heavy, again coming in at 2.8 kilograms versus a standard floor pump at half the weight. Now this is fine as it mostly lives in the garage, but on big rides where I drive to a starting point, this is kind of too big of a hassle, so I usually end up just bringing the smaller floor pump. Now despite the costs and the other downsides, I still feel that it was a worthwhile investment since I don't have a compressor, and I do a lot of tire swapping and tubeless tire mounting. Now, so far, it's saved me from countless trips of shame to the bike shop to have a tire mounted. And I think actually that partially offsets the cost of the pump as well. So if you consider the labor charge to mount one tubeless tire at your local bike shop, maybe $5 to be conservative, or $10 a pair, then, technically the pump pays for itself after mounting 20 or so pairs of tires, plus the travel time to and from the shop. Anyways, so there you go, a brief overview of the different tire mounting types and a discussion of the Topeak JoeBlow Booster pump, which again is a new version that comes in black. It comes with the DX3 head. Now at the end of the day, it's definitely a pump that I would recommend for a home mechanic who plans to do a lot of tubeless tire swaps and recognizes that this pump in particular represents an investment if they are unable to use a compressor for one reason or another. All right, so that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for sticking around and thanks for subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.